The last time I recorded episode 5, I had planned to put out one a week. And as you can tell, if there's few of you that keep up with it, it's been about 3 weeks since I broadcast one, 3 or 4 weeks. Well, if you can tell from the sound of my voice, I got a little bit ill. And frankly, I just didn't feel like putting anything together, not beside the fact that I completely lost my voice. It would have been impossible. The whole thing would have been done in subtitles. But I wanted to go ahead, even though I'm not fully recovered as far as my voice goes, I wanted to go ahead and get something out and because I am feeling better. The last time I left you, I finished kind of my whole introduction, which took like 5 episodes. And I also then decided that the next one that I did was going to be somewhat of a review of the Game of Thrones.
Audiobooks, which I encourage you to continue listening to, but I wanted to take this special moment to tell you that the next 2 episodes, not the next one, but there'll be one more in this series, but then the next 2 episodes after that I'll release, Game of Thrones is ending tomorrow, because this is being filmed on Saturday. So we're all waiting in suspense to see how it all goes down, especially her, which I've never liked her to begin with. I've enjoyed the character. I've enjoyed watching.
I recorded that
I've never been a
that
fan
announcement before the finale of Game of Thrones. Since then, of course, Game of Thrones has ended weeks ago, and I've watched every YouTube spot and every reviewer. And of course, there's absolutely no one in favor of the way it was done. The entire operation was thrown into the toilet at the end. I think we would all agree. So there's 2 things that I want to talk about in this Barbed Wire Strategy. Oh, by the way, welcome to Barbed Wire Strategy. So, as I was saying about Game of Thrones, there's 2 things I want to say here. One is why I think it's important to comment on a television show. Normally, I wouldn't comment on a television show, and I want to explain that. And the other thing that I want to explain is my point of view of what I think, my theory of what I think went on between the executives of HBO and Martin, the author of the books, and, as everybody calls them, Dumb and Dumber, David and David, or whatever the hell their name is, the producers of the show. First off, let me explain why I think it's important to talk about the Game of Thrones. Because normally, I don't think that television shows should become that paramount in our lives that we would stop and discuss them outside of just casual talk. Game of Thrones, I believe, has been significant and is important because of what Martin was able to do. And I attribute this mostly to Martin. What Martin was able to do in his storyline was to take real people from history, and weave their personalities and their logic into a story that would be set somewhat in a medieval historical setting. Although obviously Westeros and Eastros didn't exist, it's entirely fantasy made up by Martin. And of course, the overlying theme of it is the War of the Roses, which there's lots of YouTube sites that explain the War of the Roses and get into the parallels between Game of Thrones and the War of the Roses. And I suggest you look those up and check them out. But I think that this was very genius of the author, as opposed to an author just making up a bunch of people and making up a fantasy setting and putting together a plot, which is still difficult. To any plot development or weaving that's successful is always genius to a degree. But what Martin did was really above and beyond. And I think that's why it's significant. I think that's why, up until a point, the show is worth watching for people who haven't seen it. Definitely, it's worth reading the books. I bought the audiobooks and listened to them. I did not actually read the books, but I did listen to the audio of the books, and they were done very well. I hope that summarizes why we're talking about Game of Thrones, why we're spending our time instead of talking about things that are actually happening in politics, why I'm taking this little bit of a break to talk about a television show, because I think that the television show can have a significant impact on us, not just the TV show itself, but the books, in that we all should be guided by history. And we should look at history first, and we should look at the patterns that have happened in studying the politics of today, instead of just looking at what's happening on our Twitter feed or our Facebook feed or whatever Fox News blip, breaking news thing that we're doing. We have to be mindful of our history. We need to study the classics and all of history in its full capacity. And if we are able to, the more we learn, and it's a bottomless pit, but the more we're able to learn, then the easier it'll be for us to place current events in historical events. So the point that I'm trying to make about Game of Thrones is, even though it's a fantasy history, if the Game of Thrones entices kids and people in the population, the adults as well, to be interested in history, to say, well, what is behind this? What is behind the War of the Roses? What is behind a lot of the great stories? Maybe I need to look further into this. Maybe the Game of Thrones, as the television show, at least in the first 5 seasons, or the books themselves, will bring you to the table to make you more interested, to whet your appetite. And so that's the whole reason we're talking about Game of Thrones. So watch, there's 2 more of these, and the next 2 are going to be on my opinion of what I think happened behind the scenes. It's just my opinion. That's all it is. It's my opinion. We'll see you next time on Barbed Wire Strategy. Bye-bye.